So clever with money, my brother said, laughing in that way he had. The one that made everything sound like a joke but never was. Then why are you still living here? I didn't answer him. I just picked up my keys, drove to my shift at the hospital, and worked 12 hours on my feet. But I thought about that sentence the entire drive home. That was 3 years ago. I'm telling you this now because last week, I got a letter from a collections agency for a credit card I never opened. And that's when everything I had been pretending not to see finally became impossible to ignore. My name is not important. What matters is that I was 27, working as a radiology technician in suburban Ohio, and I had been financially supporting my older brother since our dad passed away 4 years earlier. Not because anyone asked me to in a direct, honest way. It happened the way a lot of things happen in families. Gradually, quietly, and by the time you realize what's going on, you're already in it, up to your throat. My brother, I'll call him what I always called him, just my brother, because that's all he ever let himself be to me, was 31 when our dad died. He had a business idea. He always had a business idea. Before that it was a food truck. Before that it was flipping houses. Before that it was something involving cryptocurrency that I didn't fully understand, and he couldn't fully explain. When Dad was in the hospital those last few months, my brother sat beside him every day and talked about the new venture. Dad listened. Dad smiled. Dad told him to go for it. I was the one paying the hospital parking fees because my brother said he was a little short that week. After Dad passed, Mom moved in with my brother. That was the plan. He had the bigger place, a 2-bedroom rental in a decent part of Columbus, and she didn't want to be alone. I understood that. I lived 40 minutes away in a studio apartment I shared with a rotating cast of houseplants and a very judgmental cat named Biscuit. I was the one who had the smaller space, the longer hours, the commute. So my brother taking Mom in made sense. What also happened though, and this part I didn't see clearly until much later, was that my brother stopped paying his rent. Not right away. The first time he called me for money was 6 weeks after the funeral. He said it was just temporary, that Mom's Social Security hadn't transferred over yet and they were waiting on some paperwork. $200. I sent it the same afternoon. I didn't even think twice because that's what you do, right? Family is family. The second time was 3 months later. 400, this time, for a car repair. His car, not Mom's. I asked a few questions, felt guilty about asking them, then sent the money. By the end of that first year, I had given my brother just over $9,000. I remember the exact number because I keep a spreadsheet for my personal finances. I'm that kind of person, organized, careful, the kind of person who reads her lease before signing it and checks her bank statement every Sunday morning with a cup of coffee. I put everything in that spreadsheet, including every transfer I sent to my brother, labeled as family loan with a little note next to each one about what he said it was for. He never paid any of it back, not a dollar. When I brought it up the first time, gently, he said he was working on it. When I brought it up the second time, less gently, he said I was being selfish and that I didn't understand how hard things were for him right now. When I brought it up the third time, he said, and I remember this almost word for word, "You've always been the responsible one. That's your thing. Don't make it everyone's problem." I stopped bringing it up after that. Instead, I started doing what I always do when I'm stressed. I worked more, picked up weekend shifts, covered for coworkers who needed time off, stacked my overtime and tried not to think about the fact that my savings account, which I had been building carefully since my first real job at 22, had barely grown in over a year. The calls didn't stop. They just changed in tone. Less apologetic, more entitled. "Hey, I need something from Mom's prescriptions. The landlord's being difficult about something. Can you help me out this month? I'm in between things right now, you know how it is." I always sent the money. Because in the back of my head, underneath all of my frustration and my spreadsheets and my careful rational mind, there was this belief that he was my brother. That he loved me. That this was temporary. That one day I would say I really need you to pay me back, and he would say okay. And that would be that, and we would go back to being normal. I don't know when I stopped believing that. Probably around the time I found out about the cell phone plan. My brother had called me 8 months earlier, to say his phone had been shut off and he couldn't afford the fees to reinstate his account. He asked if he could be added to my plan temporarily. I said yes. I figured I could take him off once he got back on his feet. 8 months later, he had added 2 lines to my account, one for himself, one for Mom, and had not paid me a single dollar toward the bill. I was paying nearly $200 a month for 3 phone lines, 2 of which I wasn't using. When I called him about it, he said Mom needed a phone for emergencies. He said I knew that when I agreed to it. He said I was acting like he was some kind of criminal when he was just trying to keep their heads above water. I said I needed him to take over the payments. He said he would. He didn't. I should have caught it then. I really should have. But I want you to understand something about being in that dynamic with someone. Especially someone you grew up with, someone you shared a childhood with, someone you called at 2 in the morning after your first real heartbreak. It warps your sense of normal. You stop being able to tell the difference between someone who's struggling and someone who has decided that your resources are their resources without ever asking. The letter from the collections agency arrived on a Tuesday. It was for a Visa card with a credit limit of $5,000 opened 18 months ago. The address on the account was my old apartment, the one I'd moved out of 2 years earlier. The name on the account was mine. I sat on my kitchen floor for probably 10 minutes without moving. Then I called the number on the back of my own credit card, just to make sure I was reading this correctly. I was. Someone had opened a credit card in my name. The account had been maxed out and left unpaid for 6 months. I pulled my credit report that same evening. There were 2 accounts I didn't recognize. The Visa and a store credit card from a home goods retailer opened around the same time. Together they represented almost $8,000 in debt being reported in my name. I called my brother. He picked up on the second ring, which surprised me. He always picked up when he thought it might be about money coming in. I asked him if he knew anything about a credit card opened in my name. There was a pause, long enough for me to know. I was going to tell you, he said. I asked him when. I was going to pay it off before it was a problem. I asked him how he got my information. Another pause. When you helped me move, some of your mail was still at the old place. It was supposed to be temporary. Temporary. There was that word again. I want to tell you that I screamed at him, that I said every single thing I had been holding back for 4 years. But that's not what happened. What happened was that my voice went very quiet and very flat, the way it does when I'm past the point of anger and into something colder, and I said, I'm going to dispute these charges. And then, I'm going to file a police report. He said I wouldn't do that to family. I said I would call him back. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed with biscuits sitting on my chest and I stared at the ceiling and I went through every moment of the last 4 years like I was reviewing footage, looking for the frame where I should have seen this coming. And the honest answer is, there were so many frames. I just hadn't wanted to look at them directly. The next morning before my shift, I called my bank and started the dispute process on both accounts. The representative walked me through what I would need: a written statement, documentation that I hadn't authorized the accounts, and a police report. I went to the precinct on my lunch break. The officer I spoke to was patient and matter-of-fact. She asked me a series of questions, took my documentation, and explained that what I was describing, using another person's identity and personal information to open financial accounts without their consent, was identity fraud, a felony. She asked if I wanted to proceed. I thought about my mother. I thought about what it would mean for her if my brother was charged. I sat with that for what felt like a long time. Then I thought about $200 transfers and phone bills and a spreadsheet full of family loans that were never going to be paid back. I thought about $8,000 in credit card debt sitting in my name. I thought about how long it would take to repair my credit. I thought about the apartment I'd been hoping to rent in the spring, the nicer one with the extra bedroom I'd been saving for, and how a credit hit like this could derail that entirely. I told her to proceed. When I got home that evening, I removed my brother and my mother from my cell phone plan. I know that sounds harsh. My mother had nothing to do with the credit cards, I'm certain of that, but I had been paying for her phone for almost a year, and she had never once asked me if that was okay, never once offered anything in return. And somewhere along the way, I had started to understand that the problem wasn't just my brother. The problem was a pattern, and I had been part of it too by never drawing a line. I didn't call either of them that night. I made dinner, watched something forgettable on TV, and went to bed early. My brother called me 3 days later. He had clearly been thinking about what to say, because his voice had a rehearsed quality to it. He said he was sorry. He said he was going through something really dark and that he hadn't been thinking clearly. He said he would pay me back every dollar if I just dropped the police report. I listened to all of it. Then I said, I believe you're sorry, I really do. But the report stays. He asked what I expected him to do. I said I expected him to deal with the consequences of his choices, the same way I had been dealing with mine for 4 years. He hung up. My mother called me the next day. She didn't mention the credit cards or the police report. She said she was worried about me, that I seemed stressed lately, that she hoped I was taking care of myself. She asked if I was eating enough. It was the most we had talked about me in years. I told her I was fine. I told her I loved her. I told her that some things had changed and I hoped she would understand eventually. She asked what things. I said I couldn't keep being the financial safety net for the household, that it wasn't sustainable for me, that I needed to prioritize my own stability. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I never asked you to do any of that. And here's the thing. She was right. She never did ask, not directly, not in words. My brother did. And I said yes, every single time, because I thought that's what love looked like in a family where you've lost your dad and everyone's just trying to stay afloat. But there's a difference between keeping someone afloat and letting them stand on your head to do it. The credit dispute took about 4 months to fully resolve. One account was removed entirely from my report. The other required more documentation and a formal investigation, but ultimately was flagged as unauthorized use. My credit score, which had dropped nearly 90 points, began to recover. My brother was not arrested. The district attorney looked at the case and, given that it was a family matter and the accounts had already been disputed, declined to prosecute. I won't pretend that wasn't a relief in a complicated way. I hadn't reported him to see him in handcuffs. I had reported him because it was the only language left that he might actually take seriously. I don't know if he did. We haven't spoken since. My mother and I have a relationship now, a careful and limited one, conducted mostly by text message. We talk about small things, her garden, my cat, a show she's watching. We don't talk about my brother, or the money, or the 4 years in between. I don't know if we ever will. What I know is this. I have the apartment I wanted. 2 bedrooms, a parking spot, morning light in the kitchen. I got approved on the first application once my credit was clean again. I have a savings account that's actually growing. I have a cell phone plan with 1 line on it, mine, and I pay it on time every month without thinking about it. I'm not angry anymore. I was for a long time. I was angry in the middle of the night, and on long drives and during slow moments at work, when there was nothing to distract me from it. But anger like that is expensive, and I have started to be more careful about what I spend. What I feel now is mostly just clear, like I can finally see the actual dimensions of my own life without someone else's needs blurring the edges. My brother told me once that being responsible was my thing. He meant it as a criticism, a way of dismissing everything I'd built and saved and protected. But he wasn't wrong. It is my thing, and it's mine alone now. I used to think that being the dependable one was just who I was, like it was written into me somewhere, the way some people are naturally funny or naturally good at sports. I kept spreadsheets. I read every document before signing it. I showed up, and for a long time I told myself that those qualities were enough, that if I just kept being steady and careful and present, the people around me would eventually meet me there. They didn't, and the hardest part wasn't realizing that. The hardest part was realizing I had made it easy for them not to. There's a version of being responsible that tips over into something else entirely, something closer to self-erasure. I sent money I couldn't afford to lose because I didn't want to be the kind of person who said no to family. I kept quiet when I should have asked questions. I extended trust past every reasonable limit because walking away felt like a failure of character. But here's what I've come to understand. Character isn't just about what you give. It's also about what you protect, including yourself. My brother used to frame my carefulness as a personality quirk, something almost embarrassing, like I was the uptight one who couldn't just relax. But discipline and integrity aren't uptight. They're the reason I had anything worth taking in the first place. Every dollar he borrowed, every account he opened in my name, none of it would have been possible if I hadn't spent years quietly building something real. He mistook my steadiness for softness. That was his miscalculation, not mine. What I didn't have, for too long, was the wisdom to see that love without limits isn't love. It's just a habit of saying yes. The smartest thing I ever did wasn't disputing the credit accounts or filing the report, though those things mattered. The smartest thing was finally asking myself, what is this actually costing me? Not just in dollars, but in sleep, in options, in the version of my future I was quietly watching shrink. Once I asked that question honestly, the answer changed everything. And then came the part nobody tells you about. The part after the decision, when you have to actually sit with it. There's no dramatic music. There's just a quiet apartment and a cat. And the strange, uncomfortable feeling of having done the right thing for yourself for the first time in a long time. That feeling doesn't arrive as triumph. It arrives as stillness. Slowly, it becomes something you recognize as peace. I don't know what my brother will do with the consequences he's facing. That part is genuinely not mine to carry anymore. What I know is that I did not give up on love. I gave up on a version of it that was destroying me, and I came out the other side with my credit repaired, my savings intact, and something harder to quantify. The knowledge that I can trust my own judgment. That I will not betray myself to keep someone else comfortable. Being responsible used to feel like a burden I carried for everyone else. Now it just feels like mine.